Israel continues pounding Gaza despite a UN resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. Israeli jets and helicopters continue to bombard Gaza on Friday, and Hamas fired more rockets into southern Israel. Israeli aircraft struck more than 30 targets before dawn, but despite the devastating offensive, Hamas continued to fire rockets into southern Israel. One fell in a street in an Israeli southern town. A bomb squad had to use a robot to dismantle the unexploded rocket. The Israeli government says the military offensive in the Gaza Strip will continue despite the UN resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. The UN Security Council resolution was overwhelmingly approved on Thursday by a 14-0 vote, with the U.S. abstaining. Hamas says it is not interested in the ceasefire because it was not consulted, and the resolution did not meet its minimum demands. Well, some of the tunnels in the border area between Egypt and Gaza still appear to be active despite numerous airstrikes that have targeted them during the Israeli offensive. Israel's military says about 300 tunnels ran under the Gaza-Egypt border before its military offensive began on December 27th. Those airstrikes have reportedly caused severe damage to the smuggling industry of goods and weapons from Egypt. Previous attempts to close the tunnels have largely failed because of the mutual mistrust between Israel and Egypt, and partly because of Egypt's inability to rein in corruption and alleviate poverty in the Sinai Peninsula. Well, the United Nations has halted aid deliveries to the Gaza Strip, citing Israeli attacks on its staff and installations. The decision emptied the Carney crossing between Israel and the Gaza Strip on Friday morning. Wu Peng with more on that.
The attack on the UN truck took place during a 3-hour lull in the violence announced by the Israeli military. The UN says gunfire from an Israeli tank killed one of its drivers as he was picking up a shipment. 2 Palestinian workers were also killed. Meanwhile, an Israeli Defense Force spokesman says that the assumption that the driver was killed by Israeli military fire is not necessarily accurate.
Well, there's no accurate information to that effect at the moment. There have been claims that he was killed by IDF gunfire. We've also heard claims to the contrary. There is no accurate information available at the moment.
He says Israel is investigating the incident. The UN offices in Gaza City were also closed on Friday. The United Nations has already demanded an investigation into Israel's shelling of a UN school in Gaza that killed nearly 40 people earlier this week. On Friday, the UN Security Council called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, but an intense bombardment of missiles from Israeli jets and helicopters early on Friday and a barrage of Hamas rockets indicated there may be no quick end to the fighting. The Security Council resolution was approved on Thursday night by a 14-0 vote, with the United States abstaining. Wu Peng, CCTV.
Well, China's top envoy to the Middle East says Israel and Hamas should make a ceasefire immediately and relieve the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Sun Bigan expressed deep concern over the violence in Gaza and those civilian casualties. Sun also put forward 3 proposals to deal with the crisis.
An immediate ceasefire is urgent, then the humanitarian crisis can be alleviated. Israel should halt its military actions in Gaza, and Hamas should stop firing rockets at Israel. The basic principle in dealing with the problem is to stabilize the situation, then stop the war. The crisis will be completely solved when the 2 sides return to political negotiations.
Well, meanwhile, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Chen Geng says China welcomes the UN resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. He's urging Israel to withdraw its troops from Gaza and says all parties concerned must return to the negotiation table as early as possible.